In the 7th century, from the Arabian Peninsula emerged a force that would reshape the world. Within less than a century, a single dynasty would rule an empire stretching from the Atlantic shores of Spain to the mountains of Central Asia. This is the story of the Umayyad Caliphate, the first great Muslim empire that would define Islamic civilization for generations to come. The birth of an empire, 661 to 680 CE. Our story begins in the year 661 CE, in the aftermath of the First Islamic Civil War, known as the First Fitna. The Muslim community stood divided, bloodied by conflict between different claimants to the caliphate. From this chaos emerged a man whose political genius would establish a dynasty that would endure for nearly a century. Muawiya ibn Abi Sufyan, the governor of Syria, had successfully challenged the authority of Ali ibn Abi Talib, the fourth Rashidun Caliph. When Ali was assassinated in 661 CE, Muawiya seized the moment. He proclaimed himself Caliph, not in the traditional holy cities of Mecca or Medina, but in Damascus, a decision that would have profound consequences for the Islamic world. Why Damascus? Muawiya was no mere desert warrior. He understood that to build an empire, he needed more than tribal loyalty. He needed administrative expertise, economic resources, and strategic positioning. Damascus offered all of these. It was a cosmopolitan city with a sophisticated Byzantine administrative tradition, a crossroads of trade routes, and a population experienced in governance. Muawiya's genius lay in his pragmatism. Unlike his predecessors, who had maintained the simple lifestyle of the early Islamic community, Muawiya embraced the trappings of imperial power. He established a court, created a bureaucracy largely staffed by former Byzantine officials, and most controversially, designated his son Yazid as his successor, transforming the caliphate from an elected position into a hereditary monarchy. This decision would define the Umayyad legacy. Critics, particularly the supporters of Ali's family, viewed this as a betrayal of Islamic principles. They argued that the caliphate should be held by the most righteous Muslim, chosen by the community, not passed down like a crown. This tension would fuel opposition throughout Umayyad rule and ultimately contribute to their downfall. The Great Expansion, 680 to 705 CE. Under Muawiyah's successors, the Umayyad war machine proved unstoppable. The reigns of Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan and his son al-Walid I marked the golden age of Umayyad expansion. These weren't just military conquests, they were the systematic construction of the world's largest empire. In the west, Umayyad armies crossed the Strait of Gibraltar in 711 CE under the leadership of Tariq ibn Ziyad. The Visigothic kingdom of Hispania crumbled before the Muslim advance. Within 7 years, nearly the entire Iberian Peninsula was under Umayyad control. The Muslims didn't stop there. They crossed the Pyrenees into Francia, penetrating deep into what is now France. It seemed as though nothing could stop the Umayyad advance until 732 CE, when Charles Martel's Frankish forces halted their northward march at the Battle of Tours. This defeat didn't end Umayyad rule in Iberia, but it marked the limits of their westward expansion. In the east, the story was equally dramatic. Umayyad armies pushed beyond the Oxus River into Central Asia, conquering Samarkand and Bukhara. They crossed the Hindu Kush mountains, establishing Muslim rule in Sindh, in what is now Pakistan. By 715 CE, Umayyad forces had reached the very borders of China and India simultaneously. But perhaps the most significant eastern campaign was the conquest of Constantinople, or rather, the attempted conquest. The Umayyads launched 2 major sieges against the Byzantine capital from 674 to 678 CE, and again from 717 to 718 CE. Both failed, largely due to Byzantine use of Greek fire, a mysterious incendiary weapon that could burn even on water. These failures would have profound consequences, as they allowed Byzantium to survive as a Christian bulwark against Islamic expansion. The scale of Umayyad expansion was unprecedented. In less than 50 years, they had created an empire larger than Rome at its height, stretching over 5,000 miles from east to west. This wasn't merely conquest, it was the creation of a new world order. The tragedy of Karbala, 680 CE. No discussion of the Umayyad Caliphate can ignore the event that would forever stain their legacy and create a permanent schism in Islam. In 680 CE, Hussein, the grandson of Prophet Muhammad and son of Ali, challenged the legitimacy of the Umayyad Caliph Yazid I. Hussein's rebellion wasn't just political, it was deeply personal and religious. He represented the family of the Prophet, the al-Bayt, and many believed that leadership of the Muslim community rightfully belonged to Muhammad's descendants, not to the Umayyads, who had actually opposed the Prophet in the early days of Islam. The confrontation came to a head at Karbala in modern-day Iraq. Hussein, traveling with a small group of family members and supporters, was intercepted by a massive Umayyad army commanded by Umar ibn Sa'd. What followed was not a battle, but a massacre. Hussein and his followers, vastly outnumbered and cut off from water supplies, were systematically slaughtered. The death of the Prophet's grandson sent shockwaves throughout the Islamic world. For the supporters of Ali's family, who would become known as Shi'ites, Karbala became a defining moment of martyrdom and resistance against tyranny. The Umayyads had won a military victory, but at an enormous spiritual and political cost. The massacre at Karbala provided their opponents with a powerful narrative of legitimate authority crushed by worldly power. This narrative would be used against them for the remainder of their rule and would ultimately contribute to their downfall. Administration and Arabization, 685 to 705 CE. While military conquest grabbed headlines, the real genius of the Umayyad Caliphate lay in their administrative innovations. Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan, often considered the greatest Umayyad Caliph after Muawiya, transformed the caliphate from a collection of conquered territories into a unified empire. The most significant of these reforms was the Arabization of the empire. Previous Islamic rulers had largely maintained existing administrative systems, with local officials continuing to use Greek, Persian or Coptic languages. Abd al-Malik changed this, declaring Arabic the sole language of administration throughout the empire. This wasn't merely administrative efficiency, it was cultural revolution. By requiring all government business to be conducted in Arabic, the Umayyads created incentives for non-Arab populations to learn the language of the Quran. Over time, this led to the widespread adoption of Arabic across the Middle East and North Africa, creating a common linguistic heritage that persists to this day. Abd al-Malik also introduced a unified currency system, minting gold dinars and silver dirhams with Arabic inscriptions and Quranic verses. These coins didn't bear the caliph's image. Islamic law prohibited such representations, but instead featured beautiful Arabic calligraphy. This monetary system facilitated trade across the vast empire and further promoted Arabic literacy. The postal system, inherited from the Byzantines and Persians, was expanded and improved. Known as the Barid, this system allowed rapid communication across the empire. Messages could travel from Damascus to Cordoba or Samarkand with remarkable speed for the medieval period. This communication network was crucial for maintaining control over such a vast territory. Under Umayyad rule, the empire was divided into provinces, each governed by a wali, governor, appointed directly by the caliph. These governors wielded enormous power, but were kept in check through a sophisticated system of spies and informants. The Umayyads understood that ruling an empire required more than just military might. It required information. Architectural marvels and cultural achievements. The Umayyads were not just conquerors and administrators. They were builders and patrons of culture. Their architectural legacy stands as testament to their vision of Islamic civilization. The most famous Umayyad monument is the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, completed in 691 CE under Abd al-Malik. This wasn't just a building, it was a statement. Rising above the site where Solomon's temple once stood, the Dome of the Rock announced the arrival of a new monotheistic civilization. Its golden dome and intricate mosaics rivaled anything in the Byzantine or Persian worlds. The architectural language developed for the Dome of the Rock, combining Byzantine, Persian and Arabian elements, would become distinctly Islamic. The building's interior is adorned with beautiful Arabic calligraphy, featuring verses from the Quran that emphasize the unity of God and subtly challenge Christian doctrines about the Trinity. In Damascus, the Umayyads transformed the Roman temple of Jupiter into the Great Mosque of Damascus, completed around 715 CE. This mosque, with its soaring minarets and vast courtyard, became a model for mosque architecture throughout the Islamic world. The mosque's prayer hall featured elaborate mosaics depicting paradisiacal landscapes, the first major artistic expression of Islamic themes. But Umayyad cultural achievements extended beyond architecture. They were great patrons of poetry, and the Umayyad court became a centre of Arabic literary culture. Poets like al-Farazdaq, Jarir and al-Akhtal competed for royal favour, producing works that refined and elevated the Arabic language. The Umayyads also commissioned the first major works of Islamic historical writing. Ibn Ishaq's biography of the Prophet Muhammad, though it has survived only in later recensions, was originally written under Umayyad patronage. This work established many of the narrative conventions that would define Islamic historical literature, economic prosperity and trade networks. The Umayyad Empire was not just a military and political entity, it was an economic powerhouse that connected 3 continents. The Caliphate sat at the centre of global trade routes, facilitating commerce between Europe, Asia and Africa on an unprecedented scale. Gold from West Africa flowed through North African trade routes to Umayyad territories, while silk and spices from China and India travelled along both overland and maritime routes through Umayyad-controlled territories. The empire's strategic position allowed the Umayyads to tax this trade, generating enormous revenues that funded their military campaigns and architectural projects. The Umayyads established sophisticated banking systems based on the Hawala system, a method of transferring money without physically moving gold or silver. A merchant in Cordoba could deposit money with a banker, receive a letter of credit, and withdraw the equivalent value in Samarkand. This system facilitated long-distance trade and reduced the risks associated with transporting wealth across vast distances. Agriculture also flourished under Umayyad rule. The conquest of Egypt brought the Caliphate one of the world's most productive agricultural regions, while the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia and the irrigated lands of Central Asia contributed to the empire's food security. The Umayyads invested heavily in irrigation systems, particularly in arid regions like Syria and parts of Iran. The economic integration of such diverse regions created unprecedented prosperity. Cities grew rapidly as trade flourished. Damascus became one of the world's largest cities, while other Umayyad centres like Cairo, Kairouan and Cordoba became major commercial hubs. This economic success had important social consequences. a new merchant class emerged, often composed of recent converts to Islam, who saw commercial opportunities in the expanding Islamic world. These merchants became powerful advocates for Umayyad policies and helped spread Islamic culture throughout the empire. Religious policies and conversion. One of the most remarkable aspects of Umayyad rule was their religious policy toward non-Muslims. Unlike many other conquering empires, the Umayyads did not force conversion to Islam. Instead, they developed a sophisticated system of religious tolerance that, while discriminatory by modern standards, was remarkably liberal for its time. Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians were recognized as people of the book, communities with revealed scriptures who could practice their religion under Islamic rule. They were required to pay a special tax called the jizya and accept certain legal restrictions, but they were protected from persecution and allowed to maintain their religious institutions. This policy served both pragmatic and principled purposes. Forced conversion would have created massive resistance and administrative chaos. By allowing religious diversity, the Umayyads maintained stability and continued to benefit from the skills and knowledge of non-Muslim populations. However, the Umayyads did provide incentives for conversion. Muslims paid the zakat, a religious tax, while non-Muslims paid the jizya, which was often higher. Muslims could rise higher in government service and had greater legal rights. Over time, these incentives led to gradual conversion, particularly among urban populations and those seeking advancement in government or military service. The process of Islamization was gradual and complex. In some regions, like Egypt and Syria, significant Christian and Jewish populations persisted throughout Umayyad rule. In others, particularly in the Arabian Peninsula and parts of Iraq, conversion to Islam was more rapid and complete. The Umayyads also had to deal with internal Islamic diversity. Different legal and theological schools were emerging, and the caliphs had to navigate these differences carefully. The Umayyads generally favoured a pragmatic approach to Islamic law, adapting to local customs and needs rather than enforcing rigid uniformity. Internal conflicts and the second fitna, 680 to 692 CE. Despite their military successes and administrative innovations, the Umayyads faced constant internal challenges. The death of Yazid I in 683 CE triggered the Second Fitna, a devastating civil war that nearly destroyed the caliphate. The conflict began with multiple claimants to the throne. In the Hijaz, Abdullah ibn Zubayr declared himself caliph and seized control of Mecca and Medina. In Iraq, various tribal and religious factions rose in rebellion. Even within Syria, the Umayyad heartland, there were disputes over succession. The most serious challenge came from the Tawaban, the penitents, Shi'ite supporters of Hussein who sought to atone for their failure to help him at Karbala. Led by Sulaiman ibn Surad, they launched a desperate campaign against the Umayyads in 684 CE. Though they were defeated at the Battle of Ain al-Warda, their sacrifice further cemented Shi'ite opposition to Umayyad rule. More dangerous was the rebellion of Mukhtar al-Thaqafi in Kufa. Mukhtar claimed to represent Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiya, a son of Ali, and attracted a diverse coalition of Arabs and non-Arabs, including many recent converts to Islam called Mawali. Mukhtar's movement was significant because it challenged not just Umayyad political authority, but also Arab ethnic supremacy within Islam. The Umayyads survived this crisis largely due to the military genius of Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan. Taking power in 685 CE, he systematically defeated his enemies through a combination of military force and political compromise. The siege and recapture of Mecca in 692 CE, where Abdullah ibn Zubayr was killed, marked the end of the Second Fitna. But the cost was enormous. The civil war had devastated Iraq, weakened central authority, and deepened sectarian divisions within Islam. The Umayyads emerged victorious but scarred, and the conflicts of the Second Fitna would continue to influence Islamic politics for centuries. The Mawali and social tensions. One of the most significant long-term challenges facing the Umayyad Caliphate was the integration of converts to Islam, known as Mawali. As the empire expanded and conversion increased, these new Muslims began to demand equal treatment with Arab Muslims, creating social and political tensions that would ultimately contribute to the dynasty's downfall. Under Umayyad rule, Islamic society was structured as a hierarchy based on descent and conversion timing. At the top were the Arab Muslims, divided between those from the Hijaz, the homeland of Islam, and those from other Arabian tribes. Below them were the Mawali, non-Arab converts to Islam. At the bottom were the Dhimmi, non-Muslims who paid the jizya tax. This system worked initially when Arabs were a small minority, ruling over vast non-Muslim populations. But as conversion to Islam accelerated, the Mawali became increasingly numerous and influential. Many were educated, skilled in administration, commerce or crafts, and they chafed under their second-class status. The Mawali faced numerous forms of discrimination. They had to attach themselves to Arab tribes as clients, often in subordinate positions. They were excluded from the highest government positions and military commands. Most galling of all, they often paid higher taxes than Arab Muslims, despite their conversion to Islam. This discrimination was not just social, but theological. The Umayyads, despite their pragmatism, maintained that Arabs held a special place in Islam. They argued that Arabic was the language of revelation, that the Prophet was an Arab, and that Arab customs represented the authentic Islamic way of life. This Arab supremacist ideology increasingly conflicted with the universal message of Islam. The tensions came to a head during the reign of Umar ibn Abd al-Aziz, 717 to 720 CE, often considered the most pious of the Umayyad caliphs. Umar attempted to reform the tax system and grant greater equality to the Mawali, but his reforms were largely reversed after his death. This reversal convinced many Mawali that meaningful change was impossible under Umayyad rule. The Mawali's grievances were particularly acute in the eastern provinces, Iran, Central Asia, and Iraq, where they formed large populations. Many were descendants of the sophisticated Persian and Mesopotamian civilizations that had ruled these regions before the Islamic conquest. They possessed administrative skills, commercial networks, and cultural traditions that were essential to the empire's functioning, yet they were treated as second-class citizens. Peak and early decline, 705 to 743 CE, the reign of al-Walid 705 to 715 CE represented the high point of Umayyad power and territorial expansion. Under his rule, the empire reached its greatest extent, stretching from Spain to Central Asia. The conquest of Sindh in modern Pakistan and the establishment of permanent Muslim rule in Iberia occurred during this period. Al-Walid was not just a successful military leader, but also a great builder. He completed the Great Mosque of Damascus, expanded the Prophet's Mosque in Medina, and commissioned numerous other architectural projects throughout the empire. Under his patronage, Arabic poetry and Islamic scholarship flourished. However, the seeds of decline were already visible during al-Walid's reign. The enormous costs of constant warfare strained the empire's finances. The logistics of governing such a vast territory became increasingly difficult. Most importantly, the contradictions within Umayyad ideology between Islamic universalism and Arab supremacy became harder to maintain as the empire matured. The reign of Umar ibn Abd al-Aziz, 717 to 720 CE, represented an attempt at reform and renewal. Often called the fifth Rashidun Caliph because of his piety, Umar tried to address many of the empire's problems. He ended discriminatory taxation against the Mawali, attempted to curb the luxury and corruption of the Umayyad court, and pursued a more inclusive vision of Islamic society. Umar's reforms were popular with many Muslims, but they faced fierce resistance from the Arab tribal elite who benefited from the existing system. His attempts to equalize taxation reduced government revenues at a time when military expenses remained high. Most significantly, his reign was too short, only 2.5 years, to implement lasting change. After Umar's death, his successors largely reversed his reforms. Yazid II, 720 to 724 CE, and Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik, 724 to 743 CE, returned to traditional Umayyad policies. But the empire they governed was different from the one Muawiya had founded. The populations were increasingly Muslim. The Mawali were increasingly numerous and resentful, and new forms of Islamic thought were challenging Umayyad legitimacy. During Hisham's long reign, several ominous developments occurred. In 740 CE, a major Berber revolt broke out in North Africa and spread to Spain. The Berbers, recent converts to Islam, resented Arab domination and discriminatory treatment. Though the revolt was eventually suppressed, it demonstrated the fragility of Umayyad rule over their non-Arab Muslim subjects. Even more significantly, in the eastern provinces, a mysterious movement began to emerge, calling for the restoration of the Caliphate to the family of the Prophet. This movement, which would eventually crystallize around the Abbasid family, appealed to both Shi'ite sympathizers who supported the rights of Ali's descendants and to Mawali who sought greater equality in Islamic society. Chapter Abbasid Revolution, 743 to 750, Toria CE. The final chapter of Umayyad rule began with a succession crisis following the death of Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik in 743 CE. The next few years saw rapid turnover of caliphs. Al-Walid II ruled for just over a year before being assassinated. Yazid III ruled for 6 months, and Ibrahim ibn al-Walid held power for only a few months before being deposed. This instability provided the perfect opportunity for the empire's enemies. The Abbasid Revolution began in the remote province of Khorasan, in what is now eastern Iran and Afghanistan. This region was far from Damascus, had a large population of Mawali, and was a crossroads where Persian, Arab, and Central Asian cultures met. It was also a frontier province where military commanders had developed semi-independent power bases. The Abbasids were descendants of Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib, the Prophet Muhammad's uncle. This gave them a claim to represent the family of the Prophet, though their connection was less direct than that of Ali's descendants. Crucially, they managed to build a coalition that included both Shiite supporters who opposed the Umayyads and Mawali who sought greater equality. The revolution was remarkably well organized. The Abbasids spent years building a secret network of supporters throughout the eastern provinces. They avoided making specific promises about future policies, instead uniting their diverse coalition around the simple goal of overthrowing the Umayyads and restoring the Caliphate to the family of the Prophet. The military phase of the revolution began in 747 CE, when Abu Muslim, the Abbasid commander in Khorasan, raised the black banners that would become the symbol of Abbasid rule. The revolt spread rapidly throughout the eastern provinces. Local grievances against Umayyad rule, high taxation, discrimination against Mawali, corruption of officials, fueled popular support for the revolution. The Umayyads, weakened by their succession crises and internal conflicts, proved unable to mount an effective response. The last Umayyad Caliph, Marwan II, was an experienced military commander, but he faced an impossible situation. The empire's finances were strained, tribal loyalties were fragmented, and much of the population was either hostile or indifferent to Umayyad's survival. The decisive battle came at the Zab River in northern Iraq in 750 CE. Marwan II's army was decisively defeated, and the Caliph himself fled westward. He was eventually tracked down and killed in Egypt, bringing an end to Umayyad rule in the east. The Abbasid victory was followed by systematic persecution of the Umayyad family. Most male members were hunted down and executed in what amounted to dynastic genocide. Only a few managed to escape, most notably Abd al-Rahman, who fled to Spain and established an independent Umayyad emirate that would endure for centuries. Legacy and historical significance. The fall of the Umayyad Caliphate marked the end of an era, but their legacy continued to shape the Islamic world for centuries. Their achievements were substantial and their influence profound, even if their rule ended in blood and revolution. Perhaps the Umayyads' greatest achievement was the creation of a unified Islamic civilization. They transformed Islam from a religion of the Arabian Peninsula into a world religion and culture. Under their rule, the basic patterns of Islamic society, law, and culture were established. The Arabic language became the lingua franca of a vast region, creating cultural unity that persists to this day. The Umayyads established the template for Islamic imperial government. Their administrative systems, adapted and refined by their successors, provided the foundation for centuries of Islamic rule. They demonstrated how a minority Muslim Arab elite could govern vast populations of different religions, ethnicities, and cultures. Their postal system, bureaucracy, and provincial structure became models for later Islamic dynasties. Architecturally, the Umayyads created the first distinctively Islamic aesthetic. The Dome of the Rock and the Great Mosque of Damascus established architectural principles that influenced Islamic building for centuries. Their synthesis of Byzantine, Persian, and Arab elements created a new visual language that expressed Islamic values and ambitions. The Umayyads also played a crucial role in preserving and transmitting knowledge from the ancient world. Their courts patronized scholars, poets, and scientists. The early translation movement that would flourish under the Abbasids began during the Umayyad period. They served as a bridge between the classical world and the Islamic Golden Age. However, the Umayyads also established precedents that would plague Islamic societies for centuries. The tension between Arab and non-Arab Muslims, the conflict between tribal and religious authority, and the problem of legitimate succession all originated during the Umayyad period. Their emphasis on hereditary rule and their maintenance of Arab supremacy created divisions that would fuel sectarian conflicts throughout Islamic history. The Umayyad experience also highlighted fundamental questions about the nature of Islamic government. Should the Caliph be chosen for his piety and religious knowledge, or could political and military skills suffice? Should Islamic society maintain the egalitarian ideals of the early Muslim community, or could it accommodate social hierarchies and ethnic distinctions? These questions, first raised during Umayyad rule, would continue to challenge Islamic political thought. Perhaps most significantly, the Umayyads demonstrated both the possibilities and the limitations of early Islamic civilization. They showed that Islam could create a world empire and support sophisticated culture, but they also revealed the tensions inherent in rapid expansion and cultural synthesis. Their rise and fall became a cautionary tale about the dangers of abandoning Islamic principles for worldly power, the Umayyads in Spain. A dynasty reborn, the Umayyad story did not end with the Abbasid Revolution. In one of history's most remarkable survivals, a young Umayyad prince named Abd al-Rahman managed to escape the massacre of his family and establish a new dynasty in Spain that would last for 3 centuries. Abd al-Rahman's journey from hunted fugitive to founder of a new state reads like an adventure novel. After the fall of Damascus, he fled across North Africa, pursued by Abbasid agents. With the help of loyal supporters and Berber allies, he crossed the Strait of Gibraltar in 755 CE and landed in Spain, then ruled by Umayyad governors who had declared independence from the new Abbasid Caliphate. The establishment of Umayyad rule in Spain was not easy. Abd al-Rahman faced opposition from Abbasid sympathizers, independent Arab commanders, and Berber tribes. It took him several years of careful political maneuvering and military campaigns to establish control over most of the Iberian Peninsula. He chose Cordoba as his capital, perhaps in conscious imitation of Damascus. The Umayyad Emirate of Cordoba became one of the most sophisticated states in medieval Europe. Under Abd al-Rahman's successors, particularly Abd al-Rahman III, 912 to 961 CE, who declared himself caliph in 929 CE, Islamic Spain reached extraordinary heights of cultural and economic achievement. Cordoba became one of Europe's largest cities, rivaling Baghdad and Constantinople. The Great Mosque of Cordoba, with its distinctive horseshoe arches and forest of columns, represented a unique development of Islamic architecture. The city's libraries, universities, and scholarly institutions made it a center of learning that attracted students from across Europe and the Islamic world. The Spanish Umayyads maintained many of the traditions of their Syrian ancestors while adapting to local conditions. They continued to patronize Arabic poetry and Islamic scholarship, but they also incorporated elements of local Spanish culture. Christians and Jews played important roles in Umayyad administration and intellectual life, creating a unique multicultural society. The survival and success of the Umayyads in Spain provided a stark contrast to their fate in the east. While the Abbasids ruled from Baghdad, the Spanish Umayyads created an independent center of Islamic civilization that preserved and developed many aspects of the original Umayyad legacy. The Umayyad legacy. As our journey through the Umayyad Caliphate comes to an end, we must ask ourselves, how should we judge this remarkable dynasty? Were they the creators of Islamic civilization or its corruptors? Were they pragmatic builders or unprincipled opportunists? The answer, like most historical truths, is complex. The Umayyads were undoubtedly flawed. Their maintenance of Arab supremacy contradicted Islamic teachings about equality. Their lifestyle often departed from the simple piety of the early Muslim community. Their harsh treatment of opposition, particularly the massacre at Karbala, left permanent scars on Islamic society. Yet their achievements were extraordinary. In less than a century, they created the largest empire the world had yet seen. They established administrative, economic and cultural systems that lasted for centuries. They transformed Islam from a local Arabian religion into a world civilization. They preserved and transmitted the knowledge of ancient civilizations while fostering new forms of art, architecture and literature. The Umayyads succeeded where other conquerors had failed. They created not just an empire, but a civilization. The Arabic language, Islamic law and Muslim culture spread throughout their domains, not just through force, but through the attractiveness of the civilization they created. From Spain to Central Asia, people adopted Arabic, converted to Islam, and participated in the cosmopolitan culture of the Umayyad world. Perhaps most importantly, the Umayyads established the precedent that Islamic civilization could be both universal and diverse. Their empire included Arabs and Persians, Berbers and Turks, Christians and Muslims, city dwellers and nomads. While they struggled with the tensions this diversity created, they also demonstrated that Islam could provide a unifying framework for unprecedented cultural and ethnic variety. The Umayyad Caliphate was, in many ways, the crucible in which Islamic civilization was forged. The questions they grappled with: how to balance religious principle with political necessity, how to govern diverse populations, how to maintain unity while accommodating difference, remain relevant to Muslim societies today. Their legacy is visible throughout the Islamic world. Every time the call to prayer echoes from a minaret, every Arabic inscription on a mosque wall, every manuscript written in Arabic script, every aspect of Islamic art and architecture bears some trace of Umayyad influence. They took the revelation that began in the caves of Mecca and the simple mosque of Medina and transformed it into a world civilization. The Umayyads ruled for less than a century, but they helped create something that has lasted for nearly 14 centuries. They may have lost their thrones, but they won immortality. In the great mosque of Cordoba, in the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, in the Arabic language itself, the Umayyad legacy lives on. They were the first dynasty to call themselves the successors of the Prophet, and in many ways they established what that succession would mean. Not just religious leadership, but political power. Not just spiritual guidance, but imperial rule. Not just preservation of the faith, but expansion of Islamic civilization to the furthest corners of the known world. The Umayyad Caliphate was many things: an empire, a dynasty, a civilization, a historical moment. But perhaps above all, it was proof of Islam's transformative power. In the hands of the Umayyads, a religion born in the Arabian desert became a force that reshaped 3 continents and created a new chapter in human history. From the palace of Damascus to the furthest outposts of their empire, from the court poets who sang their praises to the merchants who traded under their protection, from the architects who built their mosques to the scholars who preserved ancient wisdom, the Umayyads created a world. And though that world eventually passed away, its influence echoes through history to this very day. This is the story of the Umayyad Caliphate, empire of the desert, builders of civilization, and the dynasty that transformed Islam from a religion into a world order. Their rise and fall teaches us about the possibilities and perils of power, the tension between idealism and pragmatism, and the enduring impact that a single century can have on the course of human history. In the end, perhaps the greatest testament to the Umayyads is not in the monuments they built or the territories they conquered, but in the civilization they created, a civilization that continues to shape our world 13 centuries after their fall from power. They were the bridge between the simple faith of the early Muslim community and the sophisticated Islamic civilization that would follow. They were, in every sense of the word, the founders of the Islamic world. Epilogue: Remembering the Umayyads. Today, as we walk through the ancient streets of Damascus, stand in the courtyard of the great Mosque of Cordoba, or gaze upon the golden dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, we are witnessing the enduring legacy of the Umayyad Caliphate. These monuments, built over a millennium ago, continue to inspire and humble visitors from around the world. The Umayyads remind us that history is made by human beings, with all their virtues and flaws, their ambitions and limitations, their successes and failures. They were not perfect rulers, and their empire was not a perfect society. But they dared to dream of a world united under Islam, and they had the vision, energy, and determination to make that dream a reality. In our modern world, where cultural and religious differences often seem insurmountable, the Umayyad experience offers both inspiration and warning. They showed that diverse peoples can be united under a common civilization, but they also demonstrated the dangers of ethnic and religious supremacy. They proved that rapid expansion and change are possible, but they also revealed the instabilities such rapid change can create. The Umayyad Caliphate lasted for only 89 years, but it changed the world forever. From the mosques of Morocco to the madrasas of Malaysia, from the poetry of Persian to the prose of Urdu, from the laws of Islamic jurisprudence to the customs of Muslim societies, the influence of those first great Muslim emperors can still be felt. They were the Umayyads, the first dynasty of Islam, the builders of the first Islamic empire, the creators of Islamic civilization. Their story is one of triumph and tragedy, of remarkable achievement and ultimate failure, of human ambition on the grandest scale. But above all, it is a story that reminds us of the power of faith, determination, and vision to reshape the world. The desert winds that once carried Umayyad banners from Spain to Samarkand have long since stilled. The palaces of Damascus have crumbled, and the last Umayyad Caliph died over 1,000 years ago. But the civilization they created, the language they spread, the faith they championed, and the example they set continue to resonate across the centuries. In that sense, the Umayyad Caliphate never truly ended. It simply transformed, evolved, and became part of the eternal story of Islam and humanity itself. This has been the story of the Umayyad Caliphate, Empire of the Desert, dynasty of conquerors and architects of Islamic civilization. May their memory serve as both inspiration and instruction for generations yet to come. Remembering the Umayyads. Today, as we walk through the ancient streets of Damascus, stand in the courtyard of the great Mosque of Cordoba, or gaze upon the golden dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, we are witnessing the enduring legacy of the Umayyad Caliphate. These monuments, built over a millennium ago, continue to inspire and humble visitors from around the world. The Umayyads remind us that history is made by human beings, with all their virtues and flaws, their ambitions and limitations, their successes and failures. They were not perfect rulers, and their empire was not a perfect society, but they dared to dream of a world united under Islam, and they had the vision, energy, and determination to make that dream a reality. In our modern world, where cultural and religious differences often seem insurmountable, the Umayyad experience offers both inspiration and warning. They showed that diverse peoples can be united under a common civilization, but they also demonstrated the dangers of ethnic and religious supremacy. They proved that rapid expansion and change are possible, but they also revealed the instabilities such rapid change can create. The Umayyad Caliphate lasted for only 89 years, but it changed the world forever. From the mosques of Morocco to the madrasas of Malaysia, from the poetry of Persian to the prose of Urdu, from the laws of Islamic jurisprudence to the customs of Muslim societies, the influence of those first great Muslim emperors can still be felt. They were the Umayyads, the first dynasty of Islam, the builders of the first Islamic empire, the creators of Islamic civilization. Their story is one of triumph and tragedy, of remarkable achievement and ultimate failure, of human ambition on the grandest scale. But above all, it is a story that reminds us of the power of faith, determination, and vision to reshape the world. The desert winds that once carried Umayyad banners from Spain to Samarkand have long since stilled. The palaces of Damascus have crumbled, and the last Umayyad Caliph died over 1,000 years ago. But the civilization they created, the language they spread, the faith they championed, and the example they set continue to resonate across the centuries. In that sense, the Umayyad Caliphate never truly ended. It simply transformed, evolved, and became part of the eternal story of Islam and humanity itself. This has been the story of the Umayyad Caliphate, Empire of the Desert, dynasty of conquerors, and architects of Islamic civilization. May their memory serve as both inspiration and instruction for generations yet to come.